Is this your worst enemy? Saddle pain is one of the most common complaints with cycling. It's one of the most frustrating problems to solve. There's all sorts of shapes and sizes. How do you know which one's right for you? Today we're going to talk about all things saddle to hopefully get you more comfortable on your bike. Welcome to MyVeloFit, the world's first online AI-powered bike fit. Built by bike fitters for all riders. All right, so today we're going to be talking all things saddle. If you, like most people out there, have been uncomfortable in the saddle, today we're going to help you solve that. We're going to talk about common causes of pain, types of discomforts you're going to experience on the bike. We'll talk shape and size. We're going to talk about how your bike fit affects your saddle. And then we're going to talk about some things you can do once you've come up with a short list of saddles to make sure you're testing them properly. Okay, let's talk about how to diagnose your saddle pain. There's all sorts of different things that can go on down there. And we'll start by talking about each type of saddle pain and what that might mean about either your saddle or your bike fit. So there's three main issues that most people will experience or that you may experience with saddle pain. It's going to be numbness, chafing/saddle sores, or pressure pain. Numbness, in my mind, is the worst one because it can actually cause permanent damage in some cases. Numbness happens when there's too much pressure in a certain area and it blocks either nerve function or blood flow. Numbness can also stay with you for quite a while off the bike. Sometimes it's just minutes, sometimes it's days or weeks. So it's something we want to be really on top of. The other two are chafing/saddle sores. This is caused by friction on the bike. And then the third is kind of this like pressure bruisey feeling where it's just too much pressure in one area and it results in bruises, sometimes even kind of bursitis, like actual damage to tissue. So those are the issues, the types of pain that we'll see on the bike, but what causes them? There's a few different things that can cause pain on the bike. It can be bike fit related, it can be position related, or it can be kind of a combination of that and other equipment. So when we're looking at a saddle pain and trying to diagnose it, the first thing we need to do is make sure that the fit is good. We can do that by going to a fitter. We can use a platform like MyVeloFit to make sure that your fit is in range. And then we can start to look at the saddle. We don't really want to start looking at saddles before we've checked out the bike fit, because most of the time it's fit, not saddle. Most of the saddles out there, unless you're on really old equipment, are quite good these days. So we want to make sure that your fit is in range. So the first and most obvious one can be you're on the wrong saddle. The saddle can be too narrow, too wide, or the wrong shape. More importantly, in my mind though, is bike fit. It's really important to get the bike fit right before we start looking at other causes of saddle discomfort. Having poor bike fit can cause all sorts of issues. We can have too much saddle to handlebar drop. So the saddle's up here, the handlebars are down here. That causes you to rotate onto the front of the saddle. It could cause issues with the perineum and other areas. You can have just too high of a saddle. Even if your handlebars are at the right height, but the saddle's too high, you're gonna be rocking across the saddle as you try to reach for the pedal stroke, and it can cause excess pressure on the saddle. Saddle fore aft, your saddle can be way too far behind, so you're sitting on the tip of the saddle, or it can be too far forward and you might have to sit off the back of the saddle for some reason there. And then saddle tilt. The saddle's way nose up, you're gonna sit right on the tip of the saddle. If it's nose down, you'll actually often have to push back into the saddle to stabilize yourself. We see a lot of people adjust the saddle nose down to try to get weight off the front of the saddle. But then what they end up doing is they rotate their hips forwards. They're still in the similar contact area, and then they push harder back into the saddle to stabilize themselves. So we'll see more pressure on the front of the saddle with the saddle nose down. So these are all bike fit issues that can cause discomfort in the saddle. A couple other considerations when we're talking about saddle issues is, are you wearing the right shorts? There's all sorts of different brands. There's different chamois shapes, thicknesses, and widths. So you'll want to try a few of those to make sure that you've got the right one. It's not that common of a knowledge, but a lot of these brands do have guarantees. So you can, while they won't take them back and sell them, thankfully, you can often return bibs now these days, and they'll, I assume, just be destroyed, but you'll at least get your money back so you can invest in another pair. The last thing, and this is a tough one, is you have to spend time in the saddle. You're not gonna be comfortable in the saddle if you just ride once a month and you go for a 2-hour, 3-hour ride. You have to build up the time in the saddle to, for lack of a better word, tenderize that area so it gets used to the pressure and the friction down there. Once the fit is in range, then we can start looking at the saddle. Are you on the right width? Are you on the right shape? Are you on the right kind of supporting equipment? For width and shape, there's a few ways that we can test. Let's start with width. There's a few ways that you can tell if you're on the wrong width of saddle. The easiest way is if you notice you're sitting off the back of the saddle. If you're constantly having to sit way back on the back of the saddle, that's when we know maybe we're on the wrong width of saddle. So we can use that as our initial guide, or we can either go to a bike shop, or at home we can do a sit bone width measurement. We'll include a link in the description on how to measure your sit bones at home. So for width, once you've determined that your saddle's too narrow, the next step is to go to a wider saddle. Most saddles will have the width stamped somewhere on it. You can also measure it at their widest point. Now, the widest point is a little bit misleading on a lot of saddles because that's not necessarily where you're sitting. You can have a saddle that's quite wide at the widest point, but that has a different transition. For instance, these two saddles are almost the same width, but the Shimano saddle, the Pro saddle, is wider further up the saddle, where this is more of a T-shape and it flares out. So width isn't just the widest point of the saddle, it's also where the width happens. So the next step, if you've determined you're on too narrow of a saddle, is to go to a wider saddle. How much wider is based on how wide your sit bones are. Most saddles, and I really recommend buying saddles that have a money back guarantee, because it can take a few times to get the right saddle, even if you're experimenting with shape or width. So if you've spent any time looking at saddles, you know there's all sorts of choices. It can be pretty difficult to see the huge amount of saddles out there and try to decide which one's for you. But the things you need to think about are how you're going to be riding it, what you're going to be wearing, what your position and the terrain are going to be like. So saddles come in a wide spectrum. The first thing I like to think about is what my torso angle is. How low am I going to be on the bike? And then we can look at kind of terrain width and everything. So if you're look at the spectrum, we have things like these time trial saddles that are designed really to be sat right on the front of them with a very low torso angle, and so with a very small contact area. And then on the other end of the spectrum, we've got saddles that are designed to be ridden more upright. There's various shapes and cutouts that we can have. So if we compare kind of a no cutout saddle to a large cutout, those are designed to relieve more pressure in the center. And then we've got kind of these intermediate saddles with a big cutout that are designed for a pretty low front end as well. We'll consider width. So later in the video, we'll talk about how to measure seat bone width, or where that comes into play. So different width saddles will accommodate different seat bone widths in individuals. You will see a little bit less of this now is kind of men's and women's saddles. What we've started to move towards is wide and narrow saddles. So instead of it being gender specific, you'll see saddles that are just wider or narrower. Other things to think about is how much padding do the saddles have? If you're either riding on really rough terrain or riding without a chamois, you're gonna look for a saddle that either has more padding to it or more give to it. They can kind of be switched between each, so a bit more give, so flex in the shell will kind of substitute for padding. And then the other thing is shape. So we typically look at like T and V shapes, whether it's a more flared transition or a more gradual transition. That's partially personal preference and partially position based. So generally, if you're in a more aggressive position, a lower front end, more of a V shape, a more gradual transition might work for you. And then if you're more upright, a more of a T shaped saddle might be a bit of a better choice. This isn't a rule, it's a guide. You can have a really aggressive position on a T shape and a more upright position on a V shape, but those are kind of your general starting points. So the other thing is kind of cutout versus channel versus no cutout. So I've got 3 options here. So this is kind of your spectrum. So full cutout, a pressure relief channel, and then no cutout. This was your traditional shape of saddle for the longest time. There'd be no cutout, slightly rounded across the top. This still works actually quite well for a lot of people. One of the reasons why it works is a large surface area. As you remove surface area, you actually increase pressure. Why it doesn't work though is, you have your perineum, a lot of nerves and blood vessels that run down the middle here. So if there is pressure in an area that doesn't really work for you, then there'll be issues. I find these saddles work best for really flexible, very light people. If you're heavier, not that flexible, they might not be the best choice. As you move away from there, we get things like this pressure relief channels. So there's still a little bit of weight taken up in this area, but it is indented to move the pressure to the hard bony surfaces of the pelvis. And then of course the full cutout to completely remove the pressure. I hinted at it earlier. As you remove area, you increase pressure. So sometimes going to a full cutout might add too much pressure in other areas. Another thing you can actually do is consider what you don't like about your existing saddle and change it. So if you get pressure in the middle of the saddle, go for a cutout. If you've got a lot of pressure on the edges of a cutout, maybe go for a pressure relief channel. So consider what you don't like about your existing saddle as well. The next step is to test it. One of the most important things when you're testing a saddle is to make sure you're normalizing your bike fit. Different saddles will have you sit in different places of the bike. So if you change, for instance, width, it's very common to, if you were on a too narrow of a saddle and you go to the right width of the saddle, you might actually have to lower that saddle because the wider saddle will actually pop you up on the bike. So we always want to normalize for bike fit when we're testing saddles. So each time you put a saddle on, you can use a service like MyVeloFit to check your fit, to run it through, make sure your angles are the same. Or you can go off feel and just make sure you're relatively in the same position, you're pedaling the same on the bike. It's really good to do your first test on a turbo trainer at home. Make sure that you can make little micro adjustments to the angles, the fore aft, just because again, for each saddle, you're gonna sit a little bit different. I can tell you right now, we could put these 2 saddles on the same bike and you're gonna be in a drastically different position in space, even if you measure everything to be the same. So it's really important to normalize that position. Once you've got the saddle on the bike, it's not that uncommon to have a few little aches or pains. It's a new pressure point, new contact areas. You might have tissue that's not used to it. Give it a few days. But the things you really need to look out for is any numbness. If there's numbness at the time or numbness kind of that proceeds off the bike, something's got to change. It could be that the position was off, but it's more likely that it's just not the right saddle for you. A really underlooked aspect of testing a saddle is the terrain that you're riding on. If you're on really bumpy terrain, if you're on flat roads into a headwind, if you're in and out of the saddle a lot on a short, punchy climbing route, all these things are going to change how that saddle feels. So make sure you're testing saddles across the same terrain or on a similar route. It's also at home on the trainer. Saddles tend to be a little bit less comfortable on the trainer than they are on the road because of the static nature of riding on a trainer. That's actually, to me, kind of a feature, not a bug. It's gonna show if a saddle's not comfortable sooner. So maybe try on a trainer at first and then go out on the road as well. It's also worth noting when you're looking for saddles, a lot of bike shops will have a trial program as well. So you can check what your local bike shop has, because they might have some sort of demo program that lets you try a number of saddles. All right, so that was our discussion on choosing a saddle. So to summarize, when you're looking for saddles, make sure it's not fit first. So many times I have clients come in looking for a new saddle, but the issue is actually their bike fit. So check your bike fit first. If you do decide that it's not fit related and you need to try a saddle, you want to make sure you're looking at all the variables. Are you looking at width, the right amount of padding, the right shape, whether or not you need a cutout? So you've got to make sure that you're considering all these things on your saddle. Then you're making sure you're taking it for a good test, and you're normalizing your fit between each saddle, so you know that it's not the fit on the new saddle that's changed, it's actually in the right position for you. And then don't forget to look for saddles with a guarantee, because you never really know until you get out on it if it's going to be the right saddle. So if you found this video helpful, please feel free to like and subscribe. If you have any questions, pop them in the comments below. If you have a favorite saddle that you want to share, please tell us about it. Thanks for watching. See you next time.